Hi everyone, I want to talk to you about chord numbering. So when chords behave as one chords or two chords or three chords and so on. This is absolutely essential if you ever want to understand modes. Most people make the mistake of trying to understand modes before they know things like the major scale, triads and intervals, and even when they know those things, they then approach modes from a purely scaly perspective, which can work, but you're better off thinking about modes in terms of how they fit over certain chords and how those chords are behaving. So we'll do modes in a future video, but for now, don't skip this. The notes of the C major scale can be numbered from 1 to 7 like this. As soon as we harmonise, like we did in the previous video, we end up with these chords also numbered from 1 to 7. However, this time we use Roman numerals. Uppercase Roman numerals for major chords, lowercase Roman numerals for minor and diminished chords. This is the common 1-5-6-4 chord progression used in countless pop tunes. If we compare this to some other keys, and I've written a random selection of keys, this isn't all the major keys, it's just some of them. But if you wanted to change the key of our chord progression here, our 1-5-6-4 chord progression, you could do so quite easily. You could maybe go to the key of D here, and you could select a D chord as your 1 chord, A as your 5 chord, B minor as your 6 chord, and then G as your 4 chord. It would sound like the same song, just in a higher pitch or a lower pitch, depending on which octave you prefer to sing in. Let's say you had the chords of C, D minor, E minor, and F. That would be a 1-2-3-4 chord progression, and so on. So the numbering is quite simple. Now here's another example. The problem we have here is we don't know how that D is functioning or behaving. Because if you come back here, you'll see the D chord could be a 5 chord in the key of G, it could be a 1 chord in the key of C, or it could be a 4 chord in the key of A. We don't know yet, but let's look ahead. When you look at the other chords, you'll see D, E, A, A. Well, the only key from our little list here that all those chords belong to is this one here, the key of A. There is another way, a quicker way of figuring out how chords function. Whenever you have a bar chord, like say an A shape here, this is a D, and then 2 frets higher you have another bar chord, these must be functioning as a 4 and a 5 chord. That's the only time you see 2 major chords 2 frets apart like this, unless you have a key change, of course. But this is a 4 and a 5 chord. And if that's a 4 and a 5 chord, the 1 chord is always here. So here's a 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of A, D, E. If I want to change key to say the key of G, I just go same shape, E shape, and you go G, C, and D. Now what about this? If you saw an E shaped chord and then another E shaped chord 2 frets higher, again that would be a 4 and a 5 chord in a different key. Now whenever you have an E shape and another one 2 frets higher, as a 4 and a 5 chord, the 1 chord is always here. So I've got 1 chord, 4, 5, okay, E, A, B. And I can move that around and change keys. So in the key of C, here's a C, 1 chord, here's the 4 and a 5. If ever you see 2 minor chords next to each other, like say D minor and E minor, they must be a 2 and a 3 chord, because that's the only place you get 2 minor chords next to each other. Not including key changes, of course. Now, if ever you see a minor chord going up 1 semitone to a major chord, the only place that happens in a major key is from the 3 chord to the 4 chord. So there's all these different ways we can figure out how chords behave, not just by looking at the chord on its own, but by looking at the chords around it. On its own, these chords are a little bit ambiguous. For example, this A here, is that a 1 chord? Is it a 4 chord or is it a 5 chord? We don't have enough information. However, if I then go like this, that must be a 4 and a 5 chord, 2 majors next to each other, so my A was a 4 chord. What if I had this? That must be a 5 chord now, going back to a 4 chord. Finally, what if I had this? Well, the 4 and the 5, the 2 majors next to each other, were here, so this must have been my 1 chord. Now what if I have something like this? A chord of G7. That chord on its own has to be the 5th chord in a major key. There are exceptions, by the way, but we're not going to go there yet. Now, I know that's the 5th chord because dominant chords in a major key only happen on the 5th chord. So if this is a 5 chord, I can quickly do the maths. G, F, E, D, C. I've come from the key of C. I'm playing the 5th chord in the key of C. If I see a minor 7 flat 5 chord, like say B minor 7 flat 5, that chord must be the 7 chord in a key. Specifically in this case, it's the 7 chord in the key of C.